Noah, what are you saying? I see your lips moving but can't hear the words. Just go for it. What is going to make the government go, okay, we'll do something? Mass hysteria, okay? So there's a lot of attention.
A lot of media coverage.
Absolutely, because then that puts it out there and it gets more people concerned about it, so they feel pressure to do it.
There's like a benefit for the government.
Good. There's a benefit to them. It's an election year. You will be shocked at how many things happen right before an election season. Congress kind of gets their act in gear. Um, there's a lot of talk right now about us building a wall between us and Mexico. Part of a wall has been built. Part of that wall was built years ago, right before an election. It was authorized because immigration, for us to debate immigration in this country is not new. We've been debating immigration from the very beginning and we'll keep doing it. And it was an election year tactic. There was a lot of concern, there's a lot of debate, and so you can go online and you can find pictures of it. There's like funny pictures of kids like jumping off of it and all kinds of stuff. But there is part of a wall built there. And if you saw, President Trump tweeted about it yesterday. He talked about that we've already started on the wall. He said we're using the existing wall and we're making renovations and improvements and we're doing things to build up what we've already done. Okay, so the agenda has been set. Now we have our institutions. This is what you're going to call these from here on out. So since elementary school, you've been calling these branches of government, but you are now a sophisticated senior in high school, and you are going to call these policy making institutions. Ooh, ah. Because really what you're saying there is there are all these people out here that have all these feelings and want government to do something. Only these institutions can actually do that. They can formulate a policy, they can create it and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. They can adopt it into law, and then they can actually carry it out. Okay? Policies can be created in terms of a law. It can be an executive order. It can be the president saying, I think we should do. It could be negotiating a treaty. It could be dropping a bomb on somebody. It could be saying, we're not going to do anything, and that's what our policy is going to be. It could be the court, I'm pointing at the wrong one. It could be the court saying, that's unconstitutional, you can't do that. It could be the court saying, yes, that action is okay. So every time our government makes a decision, that's public policy. That's what that is. So public policy is, ready for your super fancy definition, everything the government says and does. And that's really powerful. So you think these people that we've chosen, when the president or the Speaker of the House or somebody that's like preeminent in our country, when they say something, even if they're not actually passing a binding resolution or they're not making a military decision or issuing a decision of the court, it still represents our country and it says this is what we mean. This is what we're saying, right? Here's the deal though. In our country, you never make everybody happy. I can't think of a single decision in this country where everybody's like, oh yeah, totally, right? Think, following 9/11, that was the most unified I had ever seen our country in my lifetime, right? Like how on board people were, how in support of the president they were, do whatever you need to do. There was an action passed by Congress to authorize us going into Iraq and going into Afghanistan. Not even every person in the Senate authorized that. Like there was one senator that said, I cannot vote for this. And there were lots of people in our country who didn't necessarily agree. Even though you were feeling patriotic, doesn't mean that you liked the decision. So the thing about policy in our country is that there are always winners and losers. So that's why I make it a circle, because it's never over. There are winners and losers in every situation, and what's going to happen next depends on how are the winners happy? Did they get what they wanted, or did they not get enough? The likelihood is that they didn't get enough, because our system is all about compromise and moderation. So the idea back over here it's not going to end up over here as what you think it was going to end up as. It's going to end up over here probably very diluted, because look at how many people have touched it and had a feeling about it. So the next step is going to be, how happy are the winners, or how mad are the losers? And what is their next response going to be? So let's real quickly, you all have breathing, so I'm going to prop the door open really quickly. And we're going to just walk back through this with an example really quickly, okay? So let's think about, okay, I'm going to go back to something that's a little bit older so that you can kind of see, because it continues to be part of our policy debate. All right. We have an individual, bless you, back in 2006-ish, named Senator Obama. And he is making a name for himself politically. He's spoken at the Democratic National Convention. He's very charismatic, and people encourage him to run for president, okay? He wants to run for president, so that's the way he's going to participate. He's going to use the election. He's going to be a candidate running for office. But when he runs for office, there are certain things he wants to accomplish. He doesn't want to be president just because he wants to be president. He wants to be I'm sure that's part of it. But he wants to be president because he wants to accomplish something. Does anybody remember, I know you guys were young, but does anybody remember what his biggest issue was? Policy-wise, what was the thing he cared about the most? Healthcare, right. It was very personal to him because he had a mother that had been ill. He really felt strongly about the healthcare system. So when he campaigned, he runs for office and he talks about healthcare reform, over and over and over. And so that's what he's communicating. Well, there are other individuals out there, and there are other groups out there that feel similarly, that feel differently, but definitely healthcare is like a thing in our country. So we start talking about that, and that gets filtered then through all of this. We have a political party that chooses him as their candidate for office. Okay, so they're paying attention to that input, and they're like, you know what, we're the person you want, that we want to represent us. And they actually adopt that as part of their platform. Healthcare reform is something that's going to matter to the Democratic Party. The media is in love with President Obama, or Senator Obama, the candidate, right? Because he's super charismatic, and he's great on TV, and he has a lovely family, and he's the first African American to seriously be a legitimate candidate for the president. That's incredible. That's an incredible story. And so that's something we want to play out there a lot. And then we have interest groups that really are in support of him. We also have interest groups that are not. We have interest groups that are very concerned about the things he says. So we have lots of them out there saying, we like this, we don't like this, having opinions about stuff. They don't run candidates for office, but they care about what happens in the election. And then we have an election in 2008, and President Obama, candidate Obama, very decisively becomes President Obama, right? He wins. And there's not really a question. So the policy agenda now becomes, because he talks so much about health care, what are we going to do about health care? And there's a concept out there called a mandate, or an election mandate. What that means is, if the result of the election is pretty decisive, that should tell our policymakers that we expect you to do something about this. If you look back at the election of 2008, President Obama decisively won. It's not a close election. It's not we're going to contest it. Senator McCain, who was the opposing candidate, very graciously accepted that he lost. He asked the country to come together. It was actually a very positive election, I would say, in my adult life, probably the most positive election I've ever seen. And I thought we were going that way. I was like, wow, okay. But I overestimated our country. And so we were kind of headed that way. So it's reasonable then for the government to expect that if we have a popular candidate who decisively won, we need to do something about health care, okay? Now we have a president, so he's no longer a candidate, he's here in the White House. And we have a Congress, and we have courts. So the president says, this is what I want you to do about health care, and Congress is like, oh, no, no, no. You're not the candidate anymore. You're the president, and we have a system of checks and balances. And we, 535 people over here, represent varying constituents who may have voted for you and said we want health care, but that doesn't mean they want what you said. They want some change, but they don't necessarily want what you want. So now we have bargaining and compromise, and we have going back and forth, and we have formulating a policy. And I can promise you that the legislation that these entities passed is not necessarily what was being proposed back here. nor should it be, because we have a system that says one person can't go in and make the change. We have a system that says all of these factions have a right to influence the policy. Okay? So formulation, so policies formulated, we get something called the Affordable Care Act that was passed. Some people feel like, in kind of like a shady kind of way, they used like a way through the budgetary process to kind of get it through, and we won't go into all the details yet because we haven't learned all that. But now we have a policy. Immediately, we have winners and losers. We have people who are like, yeah, we have the Affordable Care Act. And we have people who are like, oh my gosh, healthcare in this country is now ruined, right? And so we have these very extreme positions. Immediately, we have lawsuits that are filed. So we have individuals that say, I'm not happy. We have groups that say, I'm not happy. We have parties taking positions. We have media covering that. And then we end up back here again with court cases. We have judicial review exercise, which shapes the policy a little bit differently. And then we have winners and losers. So do you see what I'm saying? So it goes on and on and on. And so what we're going to do, you guys all chose a policy, almost. Not everybody did. And Noah, you're going to need to choose one today. Your job this year is going to be to trace as we learn about something. So to figure out, well, what did an individual say? What did a group say? What did the different linkage institutions do? And then as we learn about each component, to kind of work through and understand how were they working to shape that policy or that area policy. So before we do that, what I want you guys to do is, you know more about policy than you realize. You've been learning about it in your social studies classes for years, you just haven't been using that word. So on the next page in your booklet, you see I've given you some categories of policy. Omar, can you read them loud so I can hear what they are? Like on the right-hand side of
Environmental policy, social developmental policy, healthcare policy, economic policy, foreign policy, and civil rights.
Awesome. Okay. So those are broad categories. I want you to think back to U.S. history, even world history, and I want you to think about things that the United States have done in that area. It could be, remember, it can be a law, but it doesn't have to be a law. It could be an executive order. It could be a treaty. It could be a court case. It could be any of those things where we're somehow, some way saying this is the position of the government. All I want you guys to do at your table is just brainstorm. Write down as many as you can think of in the next, say, 5 minutes. Daniel, if you don't want to sit by yourself, you can go if you want, or you can sit, whatever you want to do. So you guys brainstorm, and let's see what all you can come up with to see like what it is that you remember about policy.